Hello, I'm Michelle.
And I'm Lucy.
Welcome to a special episode on food. We like food.
Do we?
Yes.
Yeah, it's still part of, we're still dragging our way through 1492.
Yeah, but this won't be horrible, I hope.
No,
it is about food.
Yeah, and this is the last one, and then we can get back to different years.
Yay!
And this one is about Solanum tuberosum, the potato.
The potato.
Yeah.
Or potatoes. They had hundreds of different varieties.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. It came from the New World, so, did it make a difference? No. Right, we'll see you next week.
No, seriously,
Yeah,
it had to have done
massive
something.
Difference. Yeah, huge difference. That's why I gave it an episode of its own, because when I was reading about it, I thought I couldn't believe how everything changed because of the potato. It's crazy.
Yeah, well, before the staple vegetable was peas, field peas.
Mm.
Yeah, they used to
Not
dry
much in
them
a
and
pea,
eat
is there?
No.
Well, they go back away. In 1970, they go all the way back to 1970. In 1970, shriveled potato tubers were found in the Western Andes that were said to be 10,000 years old.
Really?
Yes, although this has to be approached with caution. It wasn't carbon dated. They were found in the strata. So something may have wriggled its way down the strata and got into the wrong layer. So not foolproof. The first reliable data is dated to 4,000 years ago. And it was already domesticated by this point.
Makes sense.
I'm not quite sure how you can tell the difference between domesticated potatoes and wild ones, except maybe they were more uniform, bigger.
Similarity shows, well, the strata would be disturbed. Okay, so first off, strata, if nobody knows, is the layers of different types of soil on top of each other. And each of those types of or layers indicates a different timeline. But if you're domesticating a potato, you'd have to dig through that strata and disturb it to plant that potato. Whereas a root tuber just does a tiny line through that strata.
Yeah.
So it might be based on the fact that they were digging them down.
Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah, they're not just sitting on the top going green. Yeah. Yeah, it could be. Well, a big leap in time are the, is it Moche people, M-O-C-H-E, people of 600 AD. They made ceramics that not only depicted the potato on the pots, but they made pots which were potato-shaped, which just begs the question,
Why?
What shape's a potato? I mean, I did pottery the other day, and most of mine were potato-shaped, but they weren't meant to be. But the decorations on the pots included half-man, half-potato figures, which I rather liked.
That's weird.
And some with faces that looked as if they'd been carved out of a potato. But they're beautifully made and burnished. They're really lovely things. The Moche people went into decline, and it's thought that might have been due to the lack of potatoes, because they weren't growing them, they were importing them. And there may have been a trade embargo by the Tiwanaku people, who lived around Lake Titicaca, in a deliberate attempt to bring the mocha down. So, live by the potato, die by the potato. It's sort of almost using the potato as a weapon.
Yeah.
It's been calculated that with potatoes, quinoa and canihua, which I've never heard of, canihua, apparently it's a grain, it doesn't seem to have caught on like quinoa has, they could have fed 570,000 people. And that would have given them a very good diet. The population of the Tiwanaku were never that large, so they were trading potatoes with other people like the Moche. And, of course, when you hold the power of trade, you can use it.
Mm-hmm.
But between 1245 and 1310, there were severe droughts in the area, and the Tiwanaku themselves went into decline. But then along came the Inca.
Oh, dear.
They built flights of terraces into parts of mountainous terrain that hadn't been used for agriculture before. Beautiful.
That was the word I was looking for. Terracing.
Well, they understood that since they were taking over other peoples, it was vital to feed them, or they revolted.
Yeah.
So they grew a lot of maize, but that was to supplement rather than take over from the potato. Because you always hear maize, squashes, beans. Those are the three, aren't they? But
Yeah.
the potato was, definitely part of it. Both maize and potatoes appear to be depicted on their artworks, although it's obviously a lot easier to recognise a corn on the cob
Yes.
than just a lumpy potato. Frankly, could be anything. And then Pizarro and his fellow conquistadors arrived. And he arrested and executed the Inca leader, Atahualpa, which must have been infuriating for Atahualpa because he had battled to become leader and he'd literally only just got there and Pizarro arrived. The Spaniards were not at all taken with the local cuisine. They didn't rate amaranth and quinoa. They wouldn't touch guinea pig. They only ate llama and alpaca if they absolutely had to. They were very sniffy about bread made of maize or cassava. They would eat these things at a pinch. They even tried the local alcohol drink, which was chicha, which they said tasted like stale cider. But the potato would only be eaten if there was absolutely nothing else.
Oh,
It was the
really?
potato or starve, really. Columbus had come across sweet potatoes in 1492. He said they looked like yams and tasted like chestnuts, and they were part of the curiosities he brought back and put on show, along with the people. By the 1520s, sweet potatoes were being cultivated in southern Europe, but we're not talking about sweet potatoes, we're talking about real potatoes. So we can't say that Columbus discovered the potato or anything like that.
So wait, sweet potatoes are not real potatoes?
No, they're completely different family.
Yeah, it was just funny.
The first indication that Europeans were eating potatoes for pleasure came from an expedition to what's now Colombia, named after Columbus, of course, in 1537. Quote, the houses were all stocked with maize, beans and truffles. That's what they call potatoes because they didn't know what they were, really. Spherical roots which are sown and produce a stem with its branches and leaves and some flowers. Although few, a soft purple in colour. And to the root of this same plant they are attached under the earth and are the size of an egg, more or less, some round and some elongated. They are white and purple and yellow, flowery roots of good flavour, a delicacy to the Indians, and a dainty dish even for the Spaniards, unquote.
I wonder why they chose those ones, because they had so many different varieties. But interesting.
I suppose that's the one they came across. I suppose different places probably grew different ones that were more suited to it.
Yeah.
But the Spaniards do seem to have got over their complete contempt for them, at least.
Yes.
The first mention of the word potato in Europe was in the late 1530s by Pedro Cieza de Leon, who wrote an 8,000-page history of the Andes. And one thing that leapt out at me from this work was that Indians put 2 sardines' heads in the hole in the soil when they planted their maize.
As fertilizer.
Yeah, nothing to do with potatoes, but I
cool.
just thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
Cieza de Leon said, quote, of provisions, beside maize, there are 2 other products which form the principal food of these Indians. One is called potato and is a kind of earth nut, which, after it has been boiled, is as tender as a cooked chestnut. And the other food is very good and is called quinoa, unquote. And as far as we know, that's the first time potatoes are mentioned or written down by name by a European.
So potato is their word for it. Okay.
Yeah. It was, what was it? But I think it was batata
Potato.
with a B.
Oh, okay.
But it became patata when it got to Spain. And then we went for potato for some reason, not sure why. If the new settlers had been happy to eat potatoes and quinoa and guinea pig, they might have got on a lot better. Instead, they imported wheat and barley and pigs. Lots of pigs. Within 7 years of the fall of Tenochtitlan, the price of pork had gone right down because there were just so many pigs.
Everywhere. They get out, they became feral, they become a problem.
And meanwhile, back in Spain, there were chronic food shortages. What they could really have done with is the potato.
Yeah.
That would have sorted it out. Yet no one thought to ship these strange knobbly truffles back to Europe. And we don't know who did first bring the potato to Europe. You'd think it would be on record, but no, we don't know.
Of course not.
We know they're around by 1573 because the Hospital de la Sangre in Seville, for which there are continuous records since 1546, which must be very handy, apart from all the other provisions, bread, chicken, vegetables, wine, medicines, they also brought 19 pounds of potatoes. That was the first time on their list of provisions that they thought, let's try these newfangled things. And it's interesting that to start with they were bought by the pound, but very soon after they were being bought by the sackful.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. They became more widespread and the price dropped.
Yeah. Much more common. People were eating them.
They may have been grown in the Canary Islands in 1567, so earlier. But when you think the first contact was in 1492, that's quite a long gap when people didn't think them worth eating.
Yeah. And why not? They're delicious.
But they're not if you don't do anything with them.
Yeah.
Really. If you boil them up and just eat them as is.
Yeah. I was thinking like with butter, cream, sour cream, bacon bits. Fried.
Yeah, I mean, the least interesting part of that is the potato.
Is the potato, yeah.
They appear in Gerard's Herbal of 1597, and he said he had been growing them in his garden. So they become a staple of people's own plots, not necessarily a field crop yet. He thought it had come from Virginia, although potatoes weren't grown there until the European settlers brought them in. They could have come from South America via Virginia. I checked my copy of Culpeper's Herbal and it wasn't in there, and that was 1653, so it seems like quite an odd omission. Mm-hmm. We always hear that it was Drake who brought potatoes to England, but is that true? Nothing else we've thought we always knew is it? Well, the people of Offenburg in Germany obviously thought it was, because they put up a statue to him.
Oh!
With the inscription to, quote, his immortal memory, the blessings of millions who cultivated the precious gift of God as the help of the poor against need and bitter want, unquote. But it was taken down during the war when the Germans went off the Englishmen, even 16th century Englishmen. And the story we've possibly already heard is that Drake gave them to a friend who planted them in the garden, but the friend cooked the berries and they were disgusting. So he told the gardener to dig them all up again.
Oh, not realizing he needed to eat the root.
Yes. I mean, he was lucky, really. I mean, they're pretty poisonous, I think, potato berries.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. However, the gardener pulled up the potatoes and one rolled into the fire. And when it was cooked, the gardener took it out and tried it. And we've all been eating potatoes ever since. I mean, there's several reasons not to believe that. For a start, it's ludicrous.
Yes.
I mean, it's one of these stories you think, give over. And also, Drake took 2 years to get home from his voyage. How would he have stored a potato all that time? I suppose he could have planted them and had them in pots, but by the sound of it, there's not a lot of room on these ships, is there?
Can't you put potatoes in sand and they stay good for a very long time? I don't know if they stay good for 2 years.
Would that work on a wet ship?
I have no
waves?
idea.
Yeah.
Probably not.
I'm constantly finding mouldy potatoes in my vegetable basket. They've not been there for 2 years.
True.
Just a couple of weeks, probably. Well, if not Drake, what about Sir Walter Raleigh? In 1586, on the 27th of July, to be precise, he gave Elizabeth a plate of boiled potatoes. Didn't he? Well, probably not.
Nope. The answer is always no. Did he?
No. Yeah, always no. If you think it is, nah. As we said, potatoes didn't grow in North America until the European settlers took them there. He may have brought back sweet potatoes, but as we say, they've been known since 1492. Or there was a tuber called open auk. Open auk didn't catch on the same way as the potato. I did check. Amazon doesn't sell the seed for them. So I thought, I don't mind growing those. I've never heard of them before.
No.
But the potato did make its way to Europe, and once there it became very popular. Partly, or maybe mostly, due to its reputation as being an aphrodisiac. I could understand it with the tomato. The potato seems harder to explain.
I'm just sitting here in confusion. And then you say you can see it with a tomato. Why a tomato then? The number.
Do you remember that there was a bishop that said he wouldn't allow tomatoes because they looked too venereal, I think was his term.
They don't. They just don't.
Well, they did to him, but then again, he was celibate, so perhaps he sees it. He sees it everywhere.
Okay, so why would a potato be considered an aphrodisiac?
I don't know. Maybe it's because it's just so mundane to us. We just think, if it were an aphrodisiac, people would be, at the height of ecstasy all the time, wouldn't they? Because we all eat potatoes. But yeah, but that was famous. They were famous for being an aphrodisiac. Falstaff says, quote, "Let the sky rain potatoes. Let it thunder to the tune of Greensleeves. Hail kissing comfits and snow aringos. Let there come a tempest of provocation," unquote. Well, kissing comfits are a perfumed sugar plum used to sweeten the breath. Snow aringos are candied sweetmeat made from sea holly, and they're also meant to be aphrodisiacs. So you've got two aphrodisiacs and something to sweeten the breath prior to seduction. So,
I'm just sitting here shaking my head. Okay.
well, the fact that he didn't have to explain, let the sky rain potatoes, what with them being aphrodisiacs and all, he assumed that everybody in the audience would know that a potato was an aphrodisiac.
Okay.
Yeah, never look at them in the same way again.
Ew.
Not everyone was impressed by the aphrodisiac qualities of potatoes. The church banned them because they said
What?
they aren't mentioned in the Bible.
Oh, dear.
I thought, do they drive cars and use computers?
Mm-hmm.
Very few things are mentioned in the Bible, I would think, that we use and eat now.
Yeah.
But I wonder if it was the aphrodisiac quality they were against, and they just thought, what are we going to... I know what, we'll say that wasn't in the Bible. Potatoes also cure fever, leprosy, scrofula, and TB.
Oh, do they?
Mm-hmm.
It's a miracle.
I mean, when did you last have scrofula?
I can't even think of what scrofula is anymore. What is scrofula?
I can't remember. It's the king's evil, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, it's a goiter. Neck goiter.
Ah, goiter, yes.
Got it.
Well, eat your potatoes and you won't get
ever
scrofula.
have one. Okay.
The leprosy cure part was part of the doctrine of signatures, where a plant looks like the ailment because God leaves it as a clue.
Okay, so how does a potato look like leprosy?
It's meant to be the hands of the leprosy sufferer.
Oh.
I know.
Oh.
Yeah.
Ew.
Right across Europe, there were intermittent famines, and even when there wasn't a full-blown famine, life was precarious. 40% of the population in Madrid were paupers. I'm not sure what the definition of pauper may be. Maybe those dependent on the parish, I'm not sure. But when you think how much gold there was sloshing around in Spain, why so many paupers? That's probably a naive question, isn't it?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, charity wasn't a thing except through the church, and the church was supposed to do that, not you.
But they didn't always pass it on, did they? Well, from time to time there were riots, and they were always brutally quashed.
Yeah, not just put down, brutally put down.
Brutally, yes. It's always brutally, isn't it?
Yeah.
Why were so many people suffering when surely they must have been able to grow enough food to feed everyone? There were far fewer people than today. However, quite apart from summer storms which could decimate your crops and diseases which could decimate your animals, and witchcraft, of course, which could also decimate your crops and animals, apparently. Although 3/4 of the amount of land was being farmed in the 16th century as is being farmed now in England, which should have been enough for the whole population, a cornfield will now produce 12 times more than one in Tudor times.
Yeah, the yield is completely different.
It's huge, yeah. I mean, in period dramas, when you see fields of corn whooshing in the breeze...
Yeah, it didn't happen.
No,
No.
it would have been a lot sparser.
That didn't become a thing until the seed drill was invented. And, oh geez, when was that? 17 something? I don't know. Before then, you're doing what's called broadcasting. So
Yeah,
you
I'm
just
coming to
walk
the point.
along, grab a handful, and throw it out. And as you can imagine, you get groups and clumps, and then open spaces. And not everything grew because they were too spaced together or too close
Yeah.
to each other. So yeah, the yield was practically nothing compared to what we have
Yeah, anyone
now.
who's tried to sow a lawn knows it's impossible to do a sort of...
Yeah.
You always end up with bald bits and
Yep.
clumps. 9 out of 10 people working on the land, which meant they had not only to feed themselves, but that one other out of 10 that were doing something else. So each farmer had to produce 11% extra to accommodate the whole population.
Mm-hmm.
Also, where was the money? It wasn't in growing wheat. It was in wool. So the sheep farmers wanted more and more land.
Yes.
And more wheat farmers saw they would be better off with sheep. I mean, wheat's a mug's game, I think they were
Yeah.
thinking. The land had to feed several families, now full of sheep. And this broke down the ability for a community to be self-sufficient. Wheat became more scarce and more expensive, and it was getting out of the price range of many people, not just your abjectly poor. Quite a few people. It could have been a catastrophe. But then along came the potato. And it was so important, it's hard to see how Europe would have survived without it in the direction it was going. They'd have had a lot of wool, but people can't eat wool.
Mm-hmm.
The contact between Europe and the Americas might have been disastrous for the Indians, but it was a godsend for the Europeans. It took a while to see the potential of the potato. Even in 1716, market gardeners in southern England considered the radish more important than the potato. But I don't think that you can get quite long radishes, can't you? I'm presuming they're not thinking about the little red and white ones, because
No.
I mean, they're absolutely pointless. Botanists were advising people to plant it in the flower garden for its pretty purple flowers. It wasn't until the 19th century that the potato was considered the staple food, as we see it today. And much of the problem was the tubers themselves. They'd come from the Andes, and day length in the Andes is 12 hours all year round, pretty much. In summer in England, it doesn't get dark till 10, and in winter it gets dark at 4. So this means that as the days lengthened, the potato would put on growth of leaves and flowers, but as the days shortened, only tiny marble-sized tubers would form, hardly worth the amount of land they took up. But luckily, because they had been grown in the Canary Islands, the potatoes which had larger tubers in that latitude were encouraged. So the potatoes gradually worked their way further north as they were being bred to cope with it.
Right.
So it took a while. They were making slow progress northward. Also, as I said, the doctrine of signatures meant that people assumed it was a cure for leprosy. But by the 17th century, leprosy wasn't very common. Many people go through life without ever coming into contact with it. So somehow the roles got reversed and people started to say that the potatoes caused leprosy.
Oh.
If you're going to grow potatoes at all, you'd feed them to your animals. You wouldn't eat them yourself because they gave you leprosy.
Oh my goodness.
And everybody would say, "Ooh, you don't want to be eating them." Also, a farmer would be reluctant to grow it because it was hard work. If you look at the paintings by Millet and Van Gogh, as you say, you can see the farmer striding across the field, taking the seed out of a bag slung round his neck and broadcasting it in big sweeping motions. That's how you grew things, from seed. But the potato is different. You have to dig or dib a hole, put the tuber in. It was new and strange and time-consuming.
Yes.
Imagine you're at the edge of a field and you're looking across and thinking, oh, God, I've got to put hundreds of potatoes in here.
Yeah, and it's not like you can just throw them on the ground. You've got to bury them.
Yeah, you've got to be back-breaking. You've got to go along, dib, shove one in, one to the next one, dib, shove one in.
Yeah.
And vegetables weren't that popular, as we've discovered. No member of the nobility would be seen dead eating a vegetable.
Yes, unless it was like covered in meat. Really.
Yeah. And when Catherine of Aragon wanted to eat vegetables, especially vegetables she remembered from home, they had to get a gardener in from Flanders to grow them for her. Because the rich English just weren't into their vegetables of any type. The place where potatoes started to be grown as a field crop, rather than a novelty in the garden, was, you won't be surprised to hear, Ireland. For a while, English people and mainland Europeans just thought, the Irish, what are they up to?
Yeah.
But then they noticed the Irish appeared to be very healthy eating potatoes. They weren't getting leprosy. Maybe they don't give you leprosy.
Maybe.
And God wasn't striking them down because they were growing something that wasn't mentioned in the Bible.
That's still ridiculous.
In fact, they thought, well, they look better than we do. And it's thought that English Carthusian monks took the idea over to the rest of Europe as they moved to Belgium in 1626.
Now I want to know why they moved.
Yeah, I came across a Scottish monastery in Brussels, I think it was. Might be Germany. They had 4 Scots monks in. That was it. What was in the potatoes' favour was that in 1520, the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V declared that new crops were exempt from the tithe for the first 40 years of their arrival in the country.
Oh.
So, yeah, if you just grew potatoes, quinoa and tea, you didn't have to pay anything.
That's smart.
Yeah. However, landowners ignored this declaration and tried to claim tax on all crops. As so often in history, the best place to look for the expansion of the growth of potatoes was the law courts. You can find so many disparate things in the law courts, can't you?
Yeah.
Various other new plants, such as buckwheat, tobacco, clover and carrots, had already been subject to litigation. So you can more or less work out where things arrive in an area by checking the law court's record. Potatoes were quickly taken up in the area around Alsace, and the reason for this is rather depressing. They were constantly plagued by warfare in that region. It was the 30 Years' War. And where there's warfare, there's soldiers clomping across your fields, destroying the crops.
Right.
But potatoes grow underground. It doesn't necessarily do the potatoes good to be trampled on, but it's not the complete disaster it would be if it were a cereal crop.
Yeah, that needs to be above ground. With a solid stem, not a broken one.
Yes. By the 1770s, potatoes were the staple crop in Germany and Central Europe. And Frederick the Great realised their benefits and fed them to his army during the War of Bavarian Succession. And other countries looked at this, and then he started instigating the increase in acreage of potatoes. Perhaps when he started winning battles, they thought, his secret appears to be the potato. However, some peasants refused to have anything to do with them. They still believed they gave you leprosy. And anyway, they didn't taste of anything, they said. And Frederick the Great was incensed when he sent a cartload of potatoes to Kolberg, and the people refused to touch them.
Oh, don't do that.
He announced he'd cut the nose and ears off anyone who refused to eat a potato, which must be one of the bizarrest declarations ever made by a king. He also sent someone there to show them how to cook them. So perhaps they were saying, a little bit of cream, a few chives.
Oh, yeah. Let they have full access to a cow.
Yep, fry them up, bit of smart ketchup, lovely.
Yeah.
A pharmacist called Antoine Augustin Parmentier was a French soldier who was captured by the Prussians during the 7-Year War. There's just war all the time. He was kept prisoner for 3 years, and during that time was fed on nothing but potatoes. But what he noticed was that he felt fine. In fact, he felt great. You can remain very healthy on a diet consisting only of potatoes. It has everything apart from vitamin A and D.
And D is sunlight. How do you get vitamin A?
I suppose you'd have to eat a carrot or something as well.
Okay.
Parmentier devoted the rest of his life to spreading the good news about potatoes. Knocking on people's doors saying, have you heard the good news?
Do you want to be, when I grow up, a potato hawker? I just go around telling everybody about potatoes.
Well, he was so impressed that the fact he didn't come out with, he wouldn't have had scurvy. Presumably he didn't have jail fever. He was fine on his diet of potatoes, and he thought, I can feed the world. I think he was quite evangelical about it. No, I'll rephrase that. He was extremely evangelical about it. It was especially apposite given that people who couldn't put a loaf of bread on the table were rioting. What with it being France in the 1770s. And in 1785, Parmentier finally got the royal seal of approval for the potato. Not only were potatoes on the menu for King Louis's birthday that year, but he also pinned potato flowers to his lapel and Marie Antoinette stuck them in her hair. But then the cost of potato flowers rocketed because, everybody wanted potato flowers in their hair. Unfortunately for Parmentier, he had convinced the royal families to eat potatoes just at the time when everyone was thinking, but we hate the royal family.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Horrible
But
timing.
he was quite the showman. He put on dinner parties that consisted of nothing but potatoes, starting with potato soup and ending with a potato liqueur, presumably like vodka or something.
Yeah.
Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson went to some. And Jefferson took the evangelizing zeal back to America, where he served French fries in the White House. A way to get peasants over their distrust of the potato was to send troops to protect the potato fields. This is Parmentier's idea. And the thinking behind it was that people would think, well, they must be good if they need protecting.
Ah.
The king told Parmentier, quote, France will thank you someday for having found bread for the poor. But they didn't thank him. In fact, he met his end with the guillotine.
Oh.
As with so many others. It seemed terribly sad because he was...
What did he do wrong? Was it because he went with the royal family and tried to get them to
Probably. It didn't take much, did it?
It really didn't. But still. I was just trying to get them to get you to eat it.
Yeah, it was for you. I was trying to feed you. But people did begin to see the benefits of the potato. They could yield up to 4 times more calories than wheat grown in the same area of land. Half a hectare of potatoes and a cow could keep a family, whereas half a hectare of wheat
would not.
In most places, potatoes were grown concurrently with wheat in a rotational system. Ireland was a special case, and that was all England's fault, you won't be surprised to hear. The English had seized much of the land in Ireland, forcing the indigenous population to become sharecroppers. And they were generally given some small, sodden bit of land. And it made perfect sense to fill your bit of ground with potatoes. They're healthy, they're good croppers, not many diseases. Adam Smith reckoned that strongest and best-looking people came from Ireland. They were getting more calories from their land. But what they didn't have the acreage for was the rotation with wheat.
Oh.
We know that it had become the staple crop in Lancashire, northwest England, by the late 1600s, since the vicar successfully sued 13 of his parishioners for potato tithes.
Wow. Well done, vicar.
And then later, they were shipping potatoes to Gibraltar. Which seems odd. I mean, it's a long way round. But the potato was a great leveller. People speculated on grain. People were speculating on anything, weren't they? And fortunes could be made and lost, not on the farming of wheat, but on effectively gambling on how good the harvest would be, since it was so unpredictable. In years of bad harvest, the price of bread could rise to the point where only the rich could afford it. Grown concurrently with wheat, potato meant there shouldn't be any completely disastrous years. And there were still years of shortage, but not necessarily famine anymore.
Until...
Interestingly, it seems that the habit of eating bread didn't go. You just made bread out of potatoes.
I've heard
Maybe
of
like
potato
a
bread.
Welsh potato cake, yeah. But yes, it's an odd thing. You'd think, so what's that? Okay, well, I'll make bread out of that. Or whatever you've got. Well, I'll make bread out of it. However, there was a downside to the success of the potato, as Malthus pointed out. He was worried about population growth, and part of the problem was the potato. And it wasn't that he wanted more people to die of famine. It was just that, as he said, quote, more food brings more mouths, unquote. Previously, a small holding would sustain a family. If there were more siblings, the younger ones would have to go out in the world and try and make a go of it. But the potato meant if there were 4 brothers, the farm could be divided into 4, and each family would still be able to sustain themselves.
Right.
Obviously, depending on the size of the farm.
But then you're putting everything in one basket, though. You don't... Yeah, I'm just seeing the future coming.
Well, each of these brothers could marry earlier and have children earlier because they were already set up. They didn't have to go and be a journeyman and wait for their apprenticeship to finish. Malthus pointed out that this was unsustainable. It might be a coincidence, but it isn't. It's been checked that big growth in population across Europe occurred at the same time as the introduction of the potato as a staple crop.
Mm-hmm.
And Malthus complained that the potato made such population growth possible, and yet depressed living standards since there wasn't enough employment to sustain all these people. Yeah, it's difficult to know what you do for the best. I mean, this is a miracle vegetable that will feed everybody. But now there's too many people. You can't find work for them all. There's a downside to everything, isn't there? Luckily, but Malthus couldn't be expected to see this, soon after the Industrial Revolution kicked in to accommodate all these people. Employment for all. Grim employment, but employment. And you wonder how much the potato can be as part of the Industrial Revolution, made it possible.
Well, because they have the people available to do the work. That's an interesting thought.
I like it when you think, what started the Industrial Revolution? It was the potato.
Yeah.
Think, hang on, what?
Because you can't have an Industrial Revolution if everybody needs to work to eat. If you don't farm, you don't eat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Once you can make enough to feed people and some.
Yeah, then you're free up to do other jobs. History from the point of view of the potato.
Yes, and it seems to make huge differences that you wouldn't possibly think of. Also, the population healthier. They were taller as well in potato-eating places. And better able to fight off infection. And that's what you want from your workforce, really. And you don't want puny, stunted, sickly people.
Is that because they're no longer as malnourished as they were prior?
I think so.
Okay.
I mean, you put someone from that time against us, and for a start, we would look huge.
Yes.
We would look hugely overweight, but we'd also look considerably taller, healthier. But people in potato-growing areas look taller, healthier than people in the non-potato growing areas. It's all relative, isn't it?
Yeah.
The historian Chris Vanderbroek wrote, quote, "It can therefore be emphatically stated that the diffusion of potato growing meant that for the first time in the history of Western Europe, a definitive solution had been found to the food problem," unquote. The potato wasn't the only reason, because there's never only one reason for something. There was also improvement in agricultural techniques like guano and in transport. So you're able to move the food about to places that needed it more. But the impact of potatoes was absolutely massive. In Ireland, the population in the early 1600s was about 1 million. In a century, it had doubled. By 1800, it was 5 million. And by 1845, it was 8.5 million.
Wow.
All of them utterly dependent on the potato. In the early 19th century, I should put a sort of forewarning gong there, I think. In the early 19th century, Ireland was supplying England with 70% of its food imports. And this was not so great for the Irish labourer, since potatoes were plentiful and cheap, which meant so was labour, really. I read that the average daily consumption of an Irish labourer in 1839 was 12.5 pounds of potatoes.
12.5 pounds of potatoes?
That's what it said. I presume it must mean for his whole family. He can't be eating 12.5 pounds of potatoes, can he, a day?
Calories is in a pound?
I mean, the sheer bulkage of that stuff. I mean,
No, actually, that makes sense. Wow. Okay, so the supposed calculated average of a laborer is about 40 or 4,500 calories a day was what they would eat to cover how physically active they were.
So how many calories in 12.5 potatoes?
12.5 pounds. Well, there's...
Pounds, I mean.
There is, on average, 354 calories in a full pound of potatoes. It's not that much. 354 times 12, 4,248 calories. So they're still shy 300 calories. So that
But
actually is...
how do you physically eat 12.5
I
pounds of
don't
potato?
know. Like, do they end up with one of those distended belly things? But mathematically, it makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a lot of potatoes.
That's a lot of potatoes.
However, we're getting to the depressing bit now. The Great Famine of
Yeah,
Ireland
there we go.
began in 1845. Yeah, it comes sometime. Something else came from America. Phytophthora.
Potato blight.
Yeah. Phytophthora infestans. Potato blight, yeah. Phyto, and then it's Phthora, and I think Phth is usually pronounced T, isn't it? Just T. So Phytophthora infestans. It was thought it had hitched a lift on the guano ships, but in the 1990s it was discovered that the source was the highlands of central Mexico, and it was shipped to America with a consignment of potatoes. And this swept through Europe, causing hunger, which killed 2 million people. Wow. And 1 million of those was in Ireland alone. I mean, this wonder crop, all very well when it grew, but with so many people now relying on it, when it failed, it was absolutely devastating. Many other Irish people emigrated. Apparently it cost fourpence to go to England, so if you had fourpence, you got out of there. They weren't welcome, just the opposite, but people aren't usually very nice to refugees, are they?
No, they are not.
Many went to America, so potato was responsible for the large Irish-American population. And I can't go into the history of famine here. I don't really want to, for it's very sad. It's also extremely complex about who was responsible. No, well, it's not not complex about who was responsible. That's easy. That was the English and the potato blight. But I'll put a link to the In Our Time episode on the famine on Podbean, and that will fill in any gaps. Suffice it to say, the English authorities behaved appallingly. Mm-hmm. They knew what was happening and did very little to stop it, apart from to build workhouses. In fact, they still insisted on
the exports of food to England,
because they're obsessed with free trade.
Yeah.
But gratifyingly, let's look on the good side, the public raised £1.5 billion for Irish famine relief.
Ooh.
The Quakers raised 200,000, and the Choctaw Nation raised 5,000. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. They'd only just arrived in Oklahoma after the Trail of Tears and Death.
Oh, goodness, right.
And they still felt strongly enough to have a whip round and send money to Ireland once they heard of the famine. I thought that was wonderful. And there's still a close link between the Irish and the Choctaw. The Irish reciprocated when the Choctaw were particularly badly hit by COVID.
Oh.
So I thought that was quite nice. It was already known that the potato could be prone to certain diseases. There was one called curl, for instance. And in fact, it was one of the first things that the Royal Horticultural Society looked at when it was formed in 1805.
Little late.
Although it wasn't understood how curl was transmitted, it was known that if you bought Scottish seed potatoes, you were less likely to get it. And in fact, that's because Scotland was too cold for the aphids, which carry the disease, to thrive. So although they didn't know where it had come from, they had a lucky stab in the dark there, I think. People just assumed that there had to be a cure for blight. There's an article about potato blight in the Gardener's Chronicle of August 1845. Quote, "The cure for this distemper? There is none. One of our correspondents is angry at our not telling the public how to stop it, but he ought to consider that man has no power to arrest the dispensations of Providence," unquote. You can't imagine these days somebody just saying, well, you can't fight fate, can you?
No. We just need more money to research this. This is what you usually get.
Yes. Well, later it was discovered that Bordeaux mixture would help. That's copper sulphate and lime. Sounds hideously dangerous. It's still used.
Really?
But now potatoes are bred to have resistance to blight, although you can still get it. In fact, we've got it at the moment. We've got tomato blight.
Yes, I got potato blight on my fourth crop or something. We still managed to get potatoes. You hack off the tops immediately and then pull up every potato whatsoever. So we're sitting there with a little tiny colander trying to make sure we didn't even leave like little millimeter potatoes in there.
But you can't grow potatoes or tomatoes there for, I don't know how long it is. It's a long time. Yeah.
We just moved on to a different place. We'll go back eventually.
The disaster did have a silver lining for Ireland. England was forced to see how unfair the rules governing Ireland were, and they passed land acts giving Irish tenants greater security and the right to acquire larger land holdings. Wages for labourers doubled, but obviously that was largely due to a
Lack
diminished
of people.
workforce.
Yeah.
And Ireland no longer relied on just one crop. But it was always used as a sort of a way of making sure that the really poor didn't go under. In Victorian cities, you would always find the baked potato man. That was food that the very, very poorest could afford. So it was a godsend for families on low or no incomes. You could get something from the baked potato man in the street. The Russian famine could have been considerably lessened if the Soviets had accepted foreign offers of help. But it was partly because they didn't want any interference in their political system, and partly because they didn't want outsiders to see what a mess they were making of it. However, it got so appallingly bad that they eventually had to accept help. But it was a Russian called Vavilov who had studied in England, and he was keen to show that a study of plants and their diseases would be beneficial. And he saw Trotsky in a bread queue. Apparently, the Politburo was sent out to stand in bread queues to say, look, we're just like you, we suffer like you do, and they'd get their bread and then go back in the Kremlin and eat their Beluga caviar and all the rest of it. But he got into conversation with Trotsky and convinced him to allow him to get thousands of different types of potatoes sent from South America so he could do experiments to discover what would be the most suited to the various soils and climates of that vast country. So yet again, the potato was coming to the rescue in times of need.
Yeah.
And yet again, sadly, like Parmentier, Vavilov fell foul of the authorities and died in a Soviet gulag in 1943. It really doesn't pay to champion the potato.
No.
Yeah. And no one knew, not even his family, for 20 years that he died there. Yeah. To bring it up to date, it's quite difficult to get information on the potato due to semantics. English crisps are American chips. English chips are American French fries. So you have to be careful trying to work out precisely what you're talking about when you look it up. 16 million packets of crisps are eaten in the UK every day.
Wow.
British people consumed 3 times as many chips, French fries, in 2014 as in 1974. Again, in Britain, 8 portions of fish and chips are eaten every second on average. In the US, Americans consume more than £4.5 billion of French fries every year. £billion.
Wow.
Although apparently, per capita, it's the Belgians who eat the most chips, French fries. There are approximately 42,000 McDonald's restaurants around the world. So I think that from the humble beginning, when the church was telling people not to touch them because they weren't mentioned in the Bible, and other people were saying you can't touch them because they give you leprosy, I reckon we could probably say that the potato has caught on in quite a big way. And do we have Columbus to thank for that? Well, not directly, because he only brought back sweet potatoes. But inasmuch as his voyage in 1492 kicked off all the others, he could have said to have facilitated McDonald's. I'm glad we didn't give him Chew Delicious, aren't you?
Horrible, horrible human being.
Yeah, and I think I've just added to his list of complaints about him.
Yeah, rampant obesity. Thank you.
So that is the potato. It has more to do with history than you could possibly imagine.
Yeah. I liked it.
So,
That was really good.
So that is finally the end of the 1492 series. I promise, that's it.
And tomorrow, an episode on parrots.
Yeah, we might do one on tobacco later on, but not yet.
Okay.
Not yet. That might be Elizabethan. Perhaps we'll go for that.
With Walter Riley.
Yes, although apparently not. He's another one that says... He didn't do that. He didn't put the cloak down for Elizabeth to stand on. Oh, history
dear.
lets you down all the time,
Every
doesn't it?
time.
Thank you for listening.
Goodbye.
And goodbye. Enjoy your potatoes.